Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I see wonderful hellos and welcome all the way from California. So it's early for you, starting your Friday. For those of us on the east side, we're at the noon hour. So we're so grateful that you are taking the time to join us today. And we are hopeful that this topic on managing and securing online testing will provide some additional insights on ways that you can manage this somewhat difficult uh, situation for those of you who are now teaching remote and may not have some of those resources available to you to secure test environments for your learners. We have two wonderful nurse educators with us, and I'd like to introduce each of them, and then they will take us through the rest of the day today. Additionally with us, I have two wonderful facilitators, very dear colleagues of mine, Dr. Barbara Patterson, who is our distinguished scholar for the Chamberlain Center for the Advancement of Nursing Education, the Science of Nursing Education, and Dr. Marianne Rizzolo, who is our NLN consultant. So with that, let me introduce our presenters today. First, let me introduce to you Dr. Rossi Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz has been a member of Widener University School of Nursing faculty since 2003. She is currently an associate professor of nursing and their associate dean of undergraduate programs. So she's presented and published on a myriad of topics, including Huntington's disease, the use of storytelling in healthcare, favorite of mine, and nursing education. Recently, the business of nursing education. She recently completed her MBA and has a dual concentration in business process innovation and data analytics at Widener University. Welcome, Dr. Schwartz. And then we have with us Nancy Leahy, who is a professor and full-time faculty member in the community college system in Virginia. Nancy has a bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Virginia and a master's in nursing from Virginia Commonwealth University. And she's currently in the process of completing a PhD in nursing education from the University of Northern Colorado. Nancy's participated in the NLN Simulation Leadership Program. She's a certified healthcare simulation educator and is an active board member for her state simulation organization. In addition to SIM, her other professional interests include multidisciplinary doctoral research teams, factors that predispose student attrition, and the role of critical thinking in early student success. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to Nancy.
Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you all for logging in and allowing me to talk about some of the strategies that I've used over the last couple of weeks and actually the last couple of years to help provide secure testing to our online students. If you are currently using a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle, then you may already have access to Lockdown Browser, which is something that is commonly utilized if your university or college employs an online learning type of format. So you may only need to actually ask for it to be enabled in your course. So I'm going to speak about Lockdown Browser. That's the only system that I have ever used, and I've used it through both Canvas and Blackboard applications. Lockdown Browser is a secure browser that prohibits the students from clicking out of the test and searching for answers. It also disables the keyboard shortcuts, and it prevents them from taking screenshots. And the only way to really get out of the browser is to submit the test. So on face value, it is a deterrent, but I think we all realize that students have multiple electronic devices, and it really only locks in place the screen that they're accessing the test with. So they could still access their phone, an additional electronic device. So what I have opted to do, since we've been testing at home, is use a complementary product that goes along with Lockdown Browser, and that's called Respondus Monitor. So Respondus Monitor is a video proctor. And instead of logging into Google or Firefox, what they do is they access the internet through Lockdown Browser. And then they just log on to their learning management system and into the test. You set up the test just like you normally would. So there's no difference there. The video proctor portion is called Respondus Monitor, and it uses the student's webcam to actually record the student during testing, and that's audio and video recording. So the purpose of it is to provide a mechanism for the faculty to be able to go back and look at the flags that were cited by the system, and allows you to preview pretty quickly and efficiently any issues that may have occurred with the student during the exam. So what it does, and you can enable and disable certain functions of the video proctor. It requires the students to actually show an ID, and it prompts them to actually scan the room and their work surface to make sure that they don't have any unauthorized materials accessible to them. And then it uses artificial intelligence to confirm facial recognition. So whenever the student's face is obscured, or if another face is sitting in front of the computer, or there's more than one person visible on the video camera, then it flags that. So it also looks at any type of facial cues and compares that to the cues as students are reading the same questions. Doesn't have to be a synchronous type of testing. It can be totally asynchronous, but the program itself is tracking all of this information for you. It processes the video at the very end, and it allows you to look at little short thumbnail pictures and videos of what was happening at certain times. It also interprets the facial recognition, what the student was doing on the keyboard. It puts all that together into an alert system, and that alert system is categorized according to whether they feel like it was a high alert situation, a medium alert situation, or low alert situation, based on the activity that was seen in the video. Now, I gave a test just last week to 80 students, and of those 80 students, the video was only flagged as a high priority compromise or review for only 2 students. Okay, and both of those situations occurred because they looked down, and when they looked down, they couldn't see their facial recognition. Or one student, I felt sorry for her because she seemed so stressed. She actually had her hands up on her face at a couple of questions, and so that was flagged as well. But really, we have not had any technical issues using this function, and I was concerned about that because sometimes when you're streaming both video and audio and they're actually taking the test, I was anticipating issues, and we just didn't have any. Next slide. So the first thing you need to do to take advantage of this type of system is see if you actually have it. Again, a lot of learning management systems have it embedded, but it's probably disabled, and it needs to be turned on for your course. There are tons of resources that will help you test the system out. There are webinars that will walk the students through, and it's not a very complicated process. But before you get to planning on the test, you really have to start thinking about what it is you've taught and whether or not the test you're planning to give still represents what the students have learned or what they've been able to absorb through the change in the educational modality. We have a lot of students who have issues with an asynchronous or even an at-home type of environment. I teach in the community college setting. Many of my students are second career, second degree, older, and have children at home, and they're trying to manage that as well as keeping up with school. And so because of that, I've noticed that they really haven't been able to focus like they may have in the past. So I've really been looking at my test, looking at my learning outcomes, not only for the module that I'm testing the students on, but also the program modules, the program outcomes, as well as the NCLEX blueprint. And you really need to get down to discerning whether or not you need all of the questions that are there and whether or not they were adequately taught using these new modalities. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm saying is you can't always just transfer a test over that you've already used when you're dealing with this type of situation. I find that communication has been a little bit of a challenge. And so I've been helping my students in doing things that I normally have not done in the past. A couple of the strategies that I've tried is I've tried to provide content summaries, and I'm not one for giving a lot of test prep, teaching to the test type of information. So what I've done instead is provide a weekly worksheet that they have to fill in, and it helps them to pinpoint the important information. It usually includes questions. I encourage them to work together on these. The students have access to Zoom, and they can set up their own meetings in small groups, and use these sort of as a process to work together and review some of the information that is really essential. And I've also had a review session prior to the test. I think that we have to do whatever we can to try to communicate those things that we may have done in the past face-to-face, like emphasize using our voice or making sure that we're clarifying with questions. We really can't do that as much, especially if you're doing asynchronous. So we'll go ahead and scroll forward. So what I've done when I decided to use Lockdown Browser is you have to realize that they need practice, and they need to make sure that their home environment, their home internet access is really set up for this. So I created a module within my Canvas course, and I posted a video that walked through the steps of exactly what they needed to do. And then I posted a practice quiz. And it's a really good idea to leave the practice quiz open through the entire semester and give them unlimited attempts. Now, it wasn't worth any points or anything like that. But I wanted them to be able to go back to it later in the semester before the next test or before the final exam and refamiliarize themselves with the technology. And then it's really essential that the students get in there, make sure that they're able to access the quiz, and then be available to help problem solve. You know, it's really important that you set them up for success and try to be proactive in solving those type of issues. I didn't have any issues with the students getting on to Respondus or completing the test. No one got kicked out. So I kind of kept my internet and my phone handy during this whole entire testing window, but I didn't hear from a single student. So it worked out well for us. I would say that one of the things that is important is to recognize that the students are really struggling and they're very anxious. And I'm sure many of you have noticed that. And so some of the things that I have done to try to reduce their anxiety, and I talked a little bit about the review process and adding those weekly worksheets to help really hone in on that essential information prior to the test. But one of the things that I have done, and I've been doing this for a couple of years now, is I've allowed them to have a 3x5 index card, which we call a crib note. And I've told them they can put anything they want on their crib note, but that it has to be handwritten. They cannot computer generate it so that it's so tiny the entire chapter is copied and pasted onto this card. And I began this when I was still proctoring tests live in our nursing education center. And what I noticed is that it really provided them a strategy to look at whether or not they had prepared adequately. And it gave them the opportunity to write down those things that they just couldn't remember, that sort of stressed them out. And so I really encourage the students not to memorize information. Anything that they want to reference, put it on their crib note. And when I was giving the test live in the computer lab, they rarely looked at the notes. I was really surprised. And so I began to realize that it was more of a prep strategy than it actually was a test reference type of strategy. It really helped diminish their anxiety. And the other interesting thing that I noticed is that they also, I no longer heard the things like the test was not fair, the questions were tricky. I was very clear about what was going to be on the test, and they had full control of putting whatever they wanted. And so they had more accountability for the information. And that was an unexpected plus for me. So I was happy about that. I don't give open book tests, but I do give open book quizzes because it allows the students to get used to having a resource during a timed testing activity. And I've noticed that having access to a book in no way embellishes their quiz scores. It really doesn't. They realize that they have to know it because there's no time to look up information. So we're going to talk about on the next slide how I set up the test to help ensure that they're not doing things that they shouldn't be doing. So we'll go ahead and advance.
I'm going to make a
Yes.
comment, Nancy, about the crib note piece because, interestingly enough, in my doctoral work many years ago, our professor did that. And then it was a learning theory or philosophy of teaching and learning course. And he presented that option to the class and then said, so then I need you to provide the rationale for why I'm doing that from a teaching and learning point. But, when you think about it, it does really force them to go back and kind of get in touch with what they know and what they don't know, and then to, be thoughtful in how they're writing down the things that they're not sure they know, because I think it helps improve that, kind of neuronal pathway to know where to pull that knowledge up in the future. So I commend you on taking that opportunity for them.
One caveat to that is for the final exam, the very first time that I used this strategy, I had a student come with a 3x5 card that was computer generated, and she also brought a magnifying glass. No kidding. So I had to put in the syllabus that it had to be handwritten and readable without any type of assisted devices. Leave it to students to be creative. So let's talk about maintaining test security. So it's important that you want to be sure that they're aware that you're maintaining academic standards, and the expectation is that they will not cheat. And I generally will put a statement in the instructions that says, by submitting this test, I adhere to the policy, that sort of thing. I also tell them that I am monitoring the testing process, and I'm looking for patterns of when students are logging on at the same time, or advancing at the same time, or finishing at the same time. So I really make them think I'm Big Brother during testing and that I'm actually watching them. We also use a timer, and in our program we use 1.5 minutes per question. And the timer shows, but it doesn't restrict how fast they go through the test, okay? But it does give them the sense that there's not a lot of time to just kind of dawdle And the other thing that I've done since we have been testing at home is I only present the questions one at a time. So our learning management system allows us to do it that way. And I don't want more than one question on the screen because I don't want somebody with a camera snapping photos of those and sending them to their friends. So the other thing that I've done is, and I tell the students all of this up front, that there will be no backtracking. I hate to do that, but I don't want the students going back and forth and accessing the questions more than once because of testing security. So I've blocked that. The other thing I've done is randomize the response options. So I've still kept the questions themselves in content blocks, but the choices for each question are randomized. And that provides a little bit of security as well. When I used Blackboard prior to moving to Canvas, they also allow you to do other types of things like scramble the entire question so that number 1 becomes number 22, and there's no way for the students to synchronously take a test together. And then the other thing that Blackboard would allow you to do is draw from content pools. So for example, if I had 3 different modules on a test and I had a 50-item test, I could pull 15 to 18 questions from each content area. And this was randomly done by Blackboard. And it almost created a different test for every student. That's more time intensive. I think more likely than not, the easier thing to do is to create more than one version of the same test, where you switch out the correct answer, change the verbiage to change the intent of the question. So you're covering the same content, but the answers are a little bit different. And if you do that, at least in Canvas, if that's your operating system, you can actually create more than one version and specifically assigned students to different versions. So it allows you to still run your test interpretation, test statistics software on those questions, but you just do it a half group at a time. So when you're offering the test, I think a shorter window is the safest, and usually I only open the test for maybe 8 hours, but since this has occurred with COVID and so many changes in schedules, I've really become a lot more flexible than I ever thought I would need to be. And I've extended the window. The test I gave last week, I actually ended up opening over 4 days, which I have never done. But I can tell by the scores that for some students, it didn't really help them. Some of them needed the additional time. A lot of them needed to be able to do it at odd times after their kids were in bed or whatever. And so that longer window really provided more flexibility for them. And I didn't see an issue that indicated that perhaps they were cheating. So I think that's the end of what I had to say. A few little references.
Thank you, Nancy. These are great. And I wanted to, before we move into maybe see if there were a couple of key questions, Marianne, that you'd like to respond to now before we move to the next part.
Yeah, I think the main questions that have come through relate to what if the students have poor internet connections, no camera on their computer, you know, that they're sometimes have problems with Macs versus PCs. So do you have any solutions for them relating to those areas, Nancy?
The only issue that I had was I have 2 students that live in pretty rural areas, and it took a long time for their video to actually download once they finished the test. But we have students that really live in far out locations. The campus, even though it's closed, has encouraged the students, if they need to come to the parking lot to take their tests because the internet is so strong. But I would hope by checking the actual functionality of the system with them at home. Perhaps that would help them troubleshoot. Now, our college also lent out webcams and laptops and things like that for students who didn't have what they needed. With them not being in class, we had some testing laptops that were not going to be used, and all of those were kind of parceled out to the students who needed them.
Okay, I think that was the major question.
Okay.
We can handle others at the end if we have time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Rose, go ahead.
Well, Nancy actually gave a great segue into the part of my discussion, which really is going to begin to talk about academic integrity. And so what we did at Widener is we actually looked into using a remote proctoring company. Our exams are on ExamSoft. So Examity is the proctoring company that we would use that works with ExamSoft. However, it was amazingly expensive. We calculated that we had 50 exams left throughout our program, and the amount of time we would need, and we have a large sophomore, junior, and senior class, it would have been over $40,000. Needless to say, that was not something that we could incur. We have always used online testing, but we have done our online testing with ExamSoft in a face-to-face environment, using all of the securities that Nancy talked about. So the questions are scrambled, the answers are scrambled, but it was a face-to-face environment. So when this happened, we realized that we were not going to be able to utilize a remote proctoring company because of the cost. So one of the things, we did two things in order to proctor students. The first one, we did purchase a student authentication software package as part of ExamSoft, which was called ExamID, but there are many of them, to, again, ensure that the student sitting in front of the exam was the actual student. And our exams are all scheduled at the same time. We have an exam testing time. So one of the things that we chose to do was really use our access to our video conferencing software. We have Zoom, but Skype or GoToMeeting or whatever your university had, as a real way to proctor students in real time. So the next slide, please. So one of the things, we learned several things. So when we initially went to set this up, as our school was transitioning everybody online, we realized a couple things. Our initial trial, we thought, oh, this would be great. We'll use Zoom as our technology. We will assign proctors to proctor 20 students. So we had all of these Zoom rooms. We had proctors who volunteered, which were our faculty and our staff. We then, when we did this, we had these little Zoom rooms. We had each proctor scan the rooms in the same way that Nancy described that you would do on a one-on-one proctoring of an exam that the video proctoring companies would use. So we had them all scan the room to the left and the room behind them and the room in front of them, so we could get the environment done, and then we gave the code to start the exam. So let me tell you some things we learned. And just as Nancy intimated to this, students are testing in all kinds of environments. People were in their kitchens, people were in the living room, some people were in their bedrooms. So we realized that scanning the environment was a challenge in a real way, because nobody was in a room pretty much where the door was closed and nobody could come in and they were sitting at a desk. That just didn't happen for our students. So that was sort of problem number one. And the other thing we did was we took attendance. So if I had 20 students assigned to my room, I made sure those 20 students were in there. That setup of having all the students scan their rooms and making sure they were all in there took an amazing amount of time, on the upwards of 15 to 20 minutes, which was really challenging. So that was our first problem. The second problem was our student class sizes are pretty large. To give you some example, our sophomore class is at 200 students. So trying to find 10 proctors for multiple exams was a real challenge. So we had lots of volunteers. We called on our adjuncts. We did all kinds of things. And our faculty really rolled up their sleeves. That, however, was a real challenge to get all the spots filled. The third thing we realized was that, you know, not only are our students not necessarily tech savvy in all this, some of our faculty and the proctors were not tech savvy. So when we did this in the pilot, we had all of these rooms going at the same time. We have two amazing instructional technologists, tech people, and we were all texting them at the exact same time. So these poor tech people were trying to sort of answer as many calls as they could, scattered through all these rooms. So they had to get into the right room. Sorry, everybody. This is the real, really problem of internet issues. So trying to get all the tech people in the room at the same time was a real problem. We had sent out directions for students, and
We can hear and see you. I can, Nancy, or Rose, hear and see you, so.
can you? Good, okay, I wasn't sure. So no one reads directions. The students didn't read directions. The proctors or the faculty didn't read directions. So what we kind of, when we debriefed, we realized everybody was kind of doing things a little bit different, which created some confusion. And then, so after we did all this, what we realized is simpler is better. So we do have Zoom Pro accounts where we could have as many as 300 students in a room. So after this whole experience, what we realized is having these little rooms of 20 students didn't work. So instead, what we chose to do was have all the students in the primary course coordinator's Zoom room, except for our students who had accommodations. So the accommodation students who required extra time, they were in a separate room so that they weren't distracted having 200 students in a room. The second thing we did was we put all the proctors and the tech people all in that one room. Because of that, we had multiple proctors who could see 20 students on the slide, on a screen, but they could flip through multiple screens. And we found that to be really helpful as well. And we truly simplified the directions. We recognized that there was no way we were going to be able to have everybody scan their environment. So what we did was we told them that we were watching them. How we pulled this off, interestingly enough, is ExamSoft has a lockdown browser, just as Nancy talked about. We had them use Zoom on their phone. So they had to put their phone in a position so that we could see them while they were on their computer. What that did was take away one of the instruments, the tools, the tech pieces that they could have to look things up. So Zoom was going on their phones. We know they all, and we didn't have any problems with this. So we had Zoom going on their phones. They had ExamSoft going on their computers. And like Nancy, we actually only give about 1.2 minutes per question. So they get 50 questions in 60 minutes. So they don't really have time to look things up. The last thing we did is, for those of you who have used ExamSoft, there's a green screen at the end. We told them to show their green screen, and we taped this whole Zoom setup, and we told them that we were watching them and proctoring them, and they could see us. So they could see that faculty were in there proctoring. Is this ideal? No, it's not ideal. Has it worked for us? It has. And like Nancy, We have not seen any difference in our grades from the exams that we gave face to face versus the exams that we have since given online. The next slide. I'm not going to go through these slides in the next part of this, but what I did on these slides was actually take our remote student testing procedures and put them all in the slides. Honest, feel free to use any of these that are helpful to you. You can take them and use them with your faculty and your students. Because we're all in the same boat. So if there's anything that we have that could be helpful to you, feel free to use them. And then, Andrea, if you want to just flip through the other ones just so people can see them, I'm not going to read them. I kind of just went through some of these with you. And I'd like to leave it open for some questions. So I'm sure that there were many questions that you had for both Nancy and myself.
Thank you so much, Rose. And wow, some of the workarounds, I appreciate you sharing some of the didn't work so well situations, because they're lived experiences and we learn from each other. So I appreciate your willingness to share that, and then providing these specific testing procedures that are working now for your learners. I know we have quite a few questions and comments, so I'm going to ask Marianne and Barbara to facilitate some of those from our attendees here.
So one of the questions had to do with smartphones. Was it possible to use smartphones for testing?
I can only talk about ExamSoft. So in ExamSoft, no, students need to be on a laptop. Even some of Chromebook tends not to work. Some of the iPads work depending upon if it's a newer iPad or not. The Surface will only work with the brand new Surface. The older Surfaces don't work. So really it's a software issue. We have not had issues with Macs versus PCs. They both tend to work with ExamSoft for us. Canvas, though, you could access your Canvas anywhere, but I do not know that. Nancy, that would be a good question for you for the lockdown browser.
Yeah, there is a Canvas app. So I was just looking to see, because I have had students take quizzes that were not on lockdown browser, but it looks like it may allow them to do that. I mean, it's here. So
if you're in the lockdown browser, though, you can't be in the lockdown browser and in Zoom. I mean, a lockdown browser really means no other website is open except for the testing platform. So that really does limit it if you're trying to proctor people on Zoom and have them use their smartphone at the same time.
we use a lot of technology in our program. And so the students, when they come in, they're required to have a tablet or a laptop. So all of our students have some sort of device. They shouldn't have to take them on the phone, but I can see where that might create a barrier for some people.
We actually require students to have a laptop as well. We actually suggest they do not have a tablet or a Surface. We try to encourage them to get a laptop.
Okay, someone mentioned, what about if the student has internet interruptions?
For us in ExamSoft, if there's an internet interruption and the student comes back into the Zoom room, and this really happened to us a lot as we were testing, we have a resume code. So we give them the resume code, and we can see, again, we could go back and we could look at the outputs. So we could see if somebody is disconnected for a few seconds versus 10 minutes. So we have the ability to get them back in the exam. And we were able to do that with the most recent test had 170 students, and we really didn't have any issues.
Okay.
I know if you use lockdown browser, that's one of the things that they take note of is whether there's an interruption in internet service. They also can tell if an additional webcam is plugged in to your device, which is another way the students could think of to cheat probably. And so I haven't had it happen, but I do know that you can go in and it will flag if that's indeed what happened. And I've told the students to send me an email as soon as a issue occurs, that I wasn't going to answer them all night long if they're taking their tests in the middle of the night, but I would work with them to put them back on.
There was also a question about alternate format questions. Can you accommodate them?
ExamSoft has a whole host of alternate formats, including hotspots and select all that apply and fill in the blank. And there are even opportunities if you wanted to do a short answer or an essay type question. So ExamSoft has that capability. Nancy, I don't know that for Canvas.
It does. I've had issues with that type of question, so I really didn't include any of those types of questions on the exam I gave last week.
Okay. Someone asked if their timer is present on the screen so that they can see how much time is elapsing as because you have a certain amount of time for each question.
Yes, in Canvas, it displays it. They can hide it if they choose to. But I tell the students that they should use that strategically and not be obsessed with looking at the time, but checking in with their progression through the test, like at 15, 30, 45 minutes, that sort of thing.
And that's true for ExamSoft as well. And if you're a student who has accommodation, so maybe you have time and a half, for the students who have additional time, their correct time shows up on their exam.
Mm-hmm.
Can I make a comment, Marianne? I know there were a couple of comments that came through or questions related to the amount of time, and I think you have to consider the level of the learner. So if a learner is a brand new learner to the online testing and is newer in the program of study, faculty have tended to maybe allow 3 minutes a question or 4 minutes a question, but that shortens as the student progresses to match what the time ratio would be required to complete the licensure exam.
And now that you mention that, I actually added 15 minutes for technology issues. So I did accommodate for that with the test I gave last week.
And see, we actually always use online testing. So all of our students from the very beginning, when we introduced that in freshman year with quizzes and things to get them acclimated. So we have actually not changed our testing time. They all take their exam at the same time. So we don't, I give Nancy credit for giving them a window, but we're proctoring them. So we want to make sure that they're taking their exam all together.
Yeah, and that's really, and I love the comment Rose and Nancy, both of you made to provide them with strategies to practice before a test that's going to have some higher consequence for them. I know in Nancy's reference list, which you'll all be able to download with the PowerPoint slides, is the NLN Fair Testing Guidelines. And there is a link in that reference list to the NLN website. And this really talks about testing across the board, and that if students are taking an exam that requires a higher consequence for them, they should be provided prior to that with the experience of having been in that same kind of environment at a low stakes situation, so that it, when you think about the fairness to all students in the end, they require that. So if you're not familiar with fair testing guidelines, both for online testing as well as testing in simulation, I would encourage you to read those.
We've had several questions about students who have accommodations or need accommodations and how to handle that. I know you mentioned having them in a separate room, Rose. Are there other strategies? And I assume that they would have to have already gone through the proper procedures that the college requires to make them eligible.
Correct. Like all of our students who are evaluated by our accessibility services office, and then the accessibility services office tells us exactly how much additional time they can have. And as long as we know that and the test hasn't been deployed to students, we are able to adjust the time for them. And again, we've only done it in the Zoom room, not that it should be a distraction because Zoom is really on their phone, but we didn't want them to see 200 people in a room, and we thought that would be distracting. But they have gotten their accommodation time, and the distraction-free or distraction-reduced environment, according to our accessibility people, is really on the student, like their home. So we don't have a way to control their home environment. We just encourage them to find a place that's quiet where they're not going to be disrupted during the exam.
In Canvas, when you're giving an asynchronous test, you can go in after you publish the test and individually add time to students that have accommodations. So it's fairly straightforward and easy to do.
There have been a couple of questions about specific products, but I'm assuming we don't want to endorse anything, any particular product. And I think it's, you can get references from the vendor and talk to people that have used their product to get their experience. But we're hoping that some of the issues that have come up here can help you ask the right questions of a vendor to be able to purchase a product that meets your own needs.
The one thing I will say, if you're using sort of an NCLEX prep package where, and you either have those exams built into your course or you're doing comprehensive exams for your seniors, one of the things that we at least know for one of the products, using Zoom, the proctor was not allowed. They wanted us to use a external company to proctor. How we got around that was to not use the 2019 version, but to use the 2016 version, which students could use as a practice. And we're choosing to give those as those comprehensive exams because we could not afford to have the students pay for that. And we didn't want to put that cost on the students. They're already disrupted in a whole host of ways. So to have them be charged for an additional ability to be monitored did not seem fair.
Okay.
Barbara, were there any comments or Marianne, did you have more questions? I'm sorry.
I think that's been the majority of the questions, but if I've missed one, please type it in again.
Somebody put a question about the chat room if you're using Zoom. The answer is yes, that we mute all of our students and tell them that if they have technical issues, they need to use the chat room. And if we have 5 or 6 proctors in our Zoom room, one person is assigned, exactly like we're doing this presentation now, one person's assigned to the chat room, and the tech people are looking at the chat room so that they can help students address their issues. The chat room's been really helpful for us.
There was a question, excuse me, there was a question just came up about giving students feedback without threatening test security. So how do you give them feedback, exam reviews?
Yeah.
What our faculty have been doing was not pulling up this, they've been having Zoom sessions to do test review. We've always done test review with our students. They are using Zoom. They are not pulling up the questions, but they can see which question the student got wrong. So they are talking in much broader generalities. So, Nancy, you got a question wrong that was addressing the use of a diuretic in a patient who had congestive heart failure. The answer that you chose was incorrect because of this. So it is not ideal in any way, shape, or form. Normally, because we test on ExamSoft, when the students are done, they're given a code so they could review their answers that they got incorrect. We have taken that away. We're not using that now. The reality is, although this is not ideal, I think all of the faculty understand that there is a risk that these questions may not be as secure as they were before when we were testing in a room and we were watching them. So because faculty understand this, these questions are not going to be used, you know, next spring on an exam, right? They're going to put them away and use some of their other exam questions, and they'll come back to them or they'll tweak them. Because there's no way to guarantee that those questions are secure as of this point, unless you're using Nancy's method where students are really being monitored. We really can't say that.
One of the things I did for test review, because I think it's important that they revisit some of the problematic content areas that showed on the test as scoring poorly. So I didn't pull up the test, but I picked the top 5 problematic questions statistically wise, and I pulled those questions into a Word document. I only showed the correct, and then I showed the most frequently chosen wrong answer, and we talked through why it was wrong, and so that's how I addressed it.
There's a question about a maximum number of students you recommend for proctors.
What we did was we went with 20 per proctor. So we had a number of proctors in a room. When we were all in one big room, however, if we had a little less proctors, it was still okay because we had a lot of people watching the screen. But if you were going to use Zoom, really looking at more than 20 people on the screen is really hard because the blocks are so small. So I would never recommend more than 20 if you were going to have multiple rooms. But if you're just having one large room, you know, we generally have anywhere between 6 and 8 proctors in our larger sections and a little less than that in the smaller ones.
Someone asks about whether or not there's financial aid available so students can purchase computers, laptops.
Our school gave students who did not have a functioning laptop them for free. They purchased 50 computers for our students who had financial need. However, all of our students are required to have a computer coming in, so they can purchase whatever they need prior to even starting. And when we're on campus, we always have backup computers should a student have some computer problem that we can't address right away. I can tell you, out of the 50 computers that the university purchased for students, only 10 students across the entire university needed a laptop.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Andrea has mentioned several times that the PowerPoint will be available. A recording of this webinar will also be available, I think, on Monday. Is that correct, Andrea?
Yes, the webinar recording and the slides will be available on the NLN Coronavirus Resource Center webpage. You can access that by going to nln.org. Toward the bottom, you'll see a red icon that says NLN Coronavirus Resource Center. Alternatively, you can use the quick links dropdown, which is kind of at the top middle of the NLN webpage, and navigate to their in alphabetical order Coronavirus Resource Center. And from there, you can share that. That's open to anyone who has access to the internet. So you can freely share the recording and these slides with anyone you choose. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Marianne and Barbara. Marianne, did you have some additional comments?
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, Nancy and Rose have been doing online testing as part of before any of this coronavirus started. And so, you know, they've learned the lessons that they've learned, we hope will be helpful to you. But we realize that for most of you, this is a brand new experience. And so hopefully you don't make the same errors that they made. They wanted to make sure that there was some, they could provide some lessons learned. But, you know, in a time like this, you're going to run into difficulties and that are so unanticipated, and you do the best you can.
Yes, absolutely. Well, again, I echo Marianne's thank you to Rose and to Nancy for taking time out to share your wisdom and your expertise. I thank you to all of you who took the time to attend. On Monday, the recording and the slides will be available for you. And again, to remind you that the next webinar that we will be hosting is next Thursday. And we will be focusing on managing nursing assessment remotely. So that is, how are we providing ways in which we can test readiness for our learners as they progress into practice, and if anyone is doing any final type of practice initiative or an OSCE, either in senior capstone as well as our graduate program, specifically our nurse practitioner program. So we will be joined by a team from the University of Texas at Arlington that is doing some very unique things with their senior capstone, as well as the George Washington University graduate adult nurse practitioner practice program faculty. So join us next Thursday at noon. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you all, and keep the faith. We'll get through this. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.